it's understandable that she wouldn't want the kids under her feet all the time. I sound that sounds like a biased statement in and of itself. So
that's what all the stories are about.
That's
fairy tales. They
one,
always get rid of the stepmom or somehow, or the moms. And
it's a continuing theme on this show. So hopefully that doesn't offend any stepmoms out there.
Welcome to Life's Third Act, an enlightening look at estate planning, retirement, and beyond.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week we're talking about a celebrity whose death has occurred very recently, and as a result, about whom we know less than we would like regarding their estate. The reason that we've chosen to proceed with somebody this soon after their passing, when a lot of things are still unclear, is that we feel there's a lot of opportunity here to learn, even though there's a lot of uncertainty regarding what will be the ultimate outcome of the estate. And I'm talking about Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. This is something that, unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know something about. It's been in the news a lot. This couple died just recently, and it was just bizarre. And
it's very shocking.
The fact that you have a couple that had died along with the dog and in a relatively isolated location in Santa Fe and had been dead for over a week, it seems. So that's unusual, very unusual. And at first, everyone thought, as it was reported in the press, people thought there must have been foul play. But it seems clear now that there was not foul play, just an unfortunate series of events that resulted in this. But we feel that there is a great opportunity to learn something. Plus, there's a lot of interest and curiosity. So it's another factor in deciding who to include in this show, as we always do. We think about what is there something about which there's a lot of interest, and there also, importantly, is an opportunity to learn something that's helpful. So that for that reason, we've done something that's unusual on the history of this show. We're talking about somebody who has passed away recently, and there's still a lot of things that will come out, meaning that we'll probably end up doing a follow-up show in 6 months or a year, perhaps, regarding Gene Hackman.
Yeah, because there just keeps to be, another turn,
Yeah.
especially on the discovery that the date they thought she had passed, it was actually the next day, because they've done some tracing and they found that she made some phone calls trying to get some medical help.
Yeah, so it turns out that they had been dead for a while in any case. But yeah, they have moved the time at which they think that Betsy died forward some.
Yeah, and I think that fascinates everyone, because it's like, how do they know how long someone's been gone? I mean, it's pretty amazing that science can figure that out.
Yeah. And of course, it helps that we live in a very technological world too. So at one time it was left strictly to the medical examiner to be able to look for clues. When we watch mysteries and stuff,
Yeah.
Certainly if they're more than 20 years old, everybody's waiting to know when the person died by whatever the medical examiner says. And now the medical examiner, of course, is important, but probably more important is when were they last on the phone, other things. In this case, there was a heart monitor and some other monitors
He had the heart monitor
that were used for Gene Hackman to monitor his health, which many of you may have a similar device, and that's a pretty conclusive evidence regarding him.
Yeah, when it just stops. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, let's. So we're going to break the show into two parts. Two main parts and some subparts. But the two main parts are, we first want to talk a little bit about Gene Hackman, his life, his wife, Betsy.
His wives.
How they met, yeah.
I mean, it's Hollywood. Usually it's more than one.
Usually. In this case, there are just two, and two very long marriages. In any case, so a little bit about the background, the life, and kind of set the stage. And then we'll talk about the events at the end as well as the estate planning. So tell us, Sherry, lead us off. Tell us a little bit about Gene Hackman and Betsy.
Well, Gene Hackman, I mean, he's been in so many movies, right? A lot of great movies, won several awards. He's an actor for over 6 decades. So 60 years, he's been in the business. He won 2 Academy Awards, 2 BAFTA Awards, 3 Golden Globes, a Screen Actors Guild Award, and he was also nominated for an Oscar for Bonnie and Clyde back in 1967.
I
But the
remember
big
that
ones,
role.
yeah. Oh, yeah. That was like, you see clips of that all the time.
Yeah. I wonder how many of our viewers saw Bonnie and Clyde. I'm thinking a lot of younger viewers, haven't seen that movie. It was a violent movie, violent for the time.
Yes.
It
They
was
probably
like,
heard the song, but
yeah. At the time, it would have thought of as almost like Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction might have struck some people when they saw it in the 90s, is that, it seemed really violent. Well, there was a similar response to Bonnie and Clyde, though the bar was, do I say higher or lower? Anyway, so it really was the first movie where you had seen violence that I recall that graphic, at least a major Hollywood production. And Gene Hackman apparently got that role by virtue of having known Warren Beatty. They had been involved in some very small production when I think neither of them was very famous, and he liked Hackman, and he recommended him after they had already cast for the show. And I think maybe that was a remaining role that hadn't been cast, or they had lost the person that they thought they would get for that role. So it was Warren Beatty who came forward and said, this guy. And if you remember him in that role, he's the brother. Have you seen Bonnie and Clyde?
I have not.
Yeah.
I just seen clips of it whenever they talk about him when he's won other awards, on those shows where they have a highlight of someone's life.
Yeah.
That I've seen it that way.
Yeah, I think you would like it. That's one of those movies that you pause. I think everyone agrees it's a great movie, but you pause before you recommend it to everyone. But anyway, so Gene Hackman plays the brother of Clyde Barrow, and as I think occurred in real life, I think that they helped break his brother out of prison, which you think is a big deal and hard to do. But apparently, they had these work camps, where people were, they were penetrable in some way. So anyway, so they broke his brother out, and that role was played by Gene Hackman, and boy, did he play that well.
Oh.
I mean, he really, in a way, dominated the scenes he was in.
Well, I think that way with everything he's been in, because the one that I always remember him, well, actually 2, him playing Lex Luthor in the Superman series.
See, no, I didn't see that.
Yeah,
So.
but the big one for me was Unforgiven. He played a great cowboy, I mean, just...
He was, yeah, he was a
wow.
complicated character. That was a good example of a very round character. He wasn't a classic silhouette of a cowboy character in movies like that.
Mm-hmm.
He was a complicated guy. He had a mean streak in him, and and on the other hand, he seemed to have some decency about him, and he certainly thought that he was on the side of right and good. Very interesting character. We try to not get lost in these discussions as I easily could, because I find it interesting. So anyway, he a marvelous role, Unforgiven.
Yes,
and
great
Clint
actor.
Eastwood. I think
yeah.
Who would have thought that he could direct such a thing and act in such a thing? I think he directed that too.
Yeah, he's an awesome guy. I think Clint Eastwood is also a musician too. I think he does scores for some of the movies that he's been in, and I think it was Unforgiven
I didn't know
he
that.
did the music for. Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah.
So Gene Hackman, he. Do we know when he retired? I mean, he was making movies.
I think really, did he ever retire? Because even though he retired from movies, he was still he was very artsy. He liked architecture, which explains, why he and his wife, Betsy, were in that magazine, the architectural magazine, for their home that sadly they were found in.
So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about his relationship with Betsy. First, who is Betsy?
Betsy is his second wife. So they met back in the 80s. They started dating. They dated for 7 years. She's a classical pianist, and they married in 1991. So they were together all that time. Now, his first wife, Faye, he does have 3 children with her. They got married in 1956, and their marriage lasted 30 years. So like we had said before, he likes long-term relationships.
Yeah, I mean, he stands out in that way. I mean, it appears he had 2 serious relationships in his life, and one, they both lasted over 30 years. One could argue his relationship with Betsy was a 40-year relationship. So, yeah, that's something I tend to admire in people, particularly guys in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But
Well,
maybe,
there's so much temptation.
yeah, yeah. And so she and he actually married in 91, though they had been together for a number of years. And it looks like they had already moved to Santa Fe at that point because of talk about this house that was in
Yeah, it's just
Architectural
an
Digest.
awesome house that they had, rearranged, and he was big into, the beauty of the home. And so the magazine came out, they did a story on it, and there they were,
So that was in
in
91?
91 or 90 or 91. Yeah, because they had moved to the home before they said I do.
Okay, so yeah, I think it was 90. So they build or heavily remodeled this house in which they hire this architect who's famous for such things, and as you point out, Gene Hackman is very involved in that. So they chose a tract of land that's very isolated, but it's referred to as being in a gated community. I just don't want to give people the notion that it sounds like a community in Florida, a gated community,
Yeah,
or in Arizona. It's not that. It's these large tracts of land. Theirs was how many acres?
because they're kind of out in the boonies.
Yeah, wasn't there
I
tract?
think it was.
Do we have a number of acres? It's like
Um,
30 or more acres, I thought.
oh goodness.
I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, it was
Anyway,
really big.
it was these are large tracts of land, so it helps explain how this whole series of events unfolded is that each house, each person who lives in this development, wants privacy.
Yes, he
And-
definitely was big on that. Both of them were big on the privacy
Yeah.
and being away from things. They would kind of disappear for days at a time without talking to people.
Yeah, which apparently they wanted. It was kind of ultimately their undoing, one could argue. Then tell us, they move out there, they continue living there. That's their primary residence, except when Gene's working. Another thing that we see about their lifestyle is that there wasn't a lot of interaction with the children. But let's talk a little bit about that, because in this case, it's not clear one way or the other, as it often is. Often, I guess notoriously, we see situations where there's bad blood. There's been disagreements over something, often the second wife, notoriously the second wife. But in this case, I've read a lot of articles that I could find. Whoever had done some research on this topic, and I wasn't hearing or seeing any of that.
No, it just seemed like I read one article where he was involved in an interview, and he was basically saying that, he chose the Hollywood life. He was acting. He was away from home a lot, so he wasn't there for his children.
Yeah. Yeah, that stereotype situation where you have a famous, successful person who, they pursue and build that career, and often at the price of their relationship with kids. But in this case, the kids there's no evidence of resentment. Now, again, we're getting a pretty superficial read. I think that it does show that there's some comportment among those in the family that they believe that this is not the place to air such things. And so you can be confident that there certainly are the normal disagreements that exist below, particularly where the kids don't have any regular or frequent interaction with their dad. Yet we don't see those stories reported that you would fully expect to be reported when such things exist.
Well, and two, they're not. I mean, when we say kids, he's got 3 kids. His son is 65. His oldest daughter is 62, and the youngest is 58. So I think that and I hope. I mean, I shouldn't say all kids are like that, but they should be mature enough not to be, stirring the pot. And actually, the youngest daughter had a lot of nice things to say about Betsy, saying that
Which is really extraordinary.
Yeah, that she gives her credit for taking care of her dad.
Okay, well, I can see where that would be well warranted. Again, we don't see any evidence that she disserved Gene in any clear way, other than a few ways that we'll talk about. But so I still suspect that I would be surprised if there was not some conflict between Betsy and the children. That would just amaze me, having done as many stories and read as I have, and not to mention as a lawyer both with respect to divorce as well as with respect to estate planning. I think there is more. This is the reason that there are disadvantages to doing this show when we do it. If we were reporting on this and it were 6 months later, then I think these things are going to come to. We're going to hear about them.
Yeah,
is what I'm
eventually.
suggesting.
Wait until they write a book, and then they can make money off the
Well,
book.
but wait. Now let me say this.
TV series.
Wait, there's a chance we may not hear as much. We'll hear some, but we won't hear about it with the intensity as if Betsy had lived. In other words, if you have all these facts, but Betsy lives, so now she's alive and she's making some claim, continuing claim to the assets, which we'll talk more about that in a minute, so I'll resist getting into that. So then we would definitely be hearing more. I mean, there would be fireworks flying. The reason in this case we may not see this in the form of fireworks, but we may simply start finding out that, yeah, there is resentment. Interviews will be done. Maybe even a book will be written. But we will know that, and I'm confident we will know, that there was conflict between Betsy and these kids. And that's not inconsistent with one of the children saying, okay, she was good for Dad. How many times have we seen that? How many times have you seen that with people you know, where somebody who you think may have been the source of conflict in the family and of alienation and whatnot, still you know that person has been fiercely loyal to a dad or a mom. Anyway, so Betsy had no children.
They didn't have any children together. She didn't have any kids either. So
yeah. So it's understandable that she wouldn't want the kids under her feet all the time. That sounds that sounds like a biased statement in and of itself. But by that I mean, notoriously, a second wife, understandably, is in a situation where they often do not want the kids to be under their feet all the time as they view it.
That's what all the stories are about. All the fairy tales. They always get rid of the stepmom or somehow, or the moms. And
it's a continuing theme on this show. So hopefully,
stepmoms.
Hopefully that doesn't offend any stepmoms out there. It's not just stepmoms. It's just that arithmetically or statistically, we know that it's far more common and occurs in that scenario than the reverse.
Yeah, well, and you've seen it. You've seen a lot of it. So
yeah, it's one of the tragedies of divorce. So let's talk a little bit about the estate planning. If you look at this from 10,000 feet, you can say, okay, tell me, did they do estate planning? Answer's yes. Was estate planning done fairly early? Yes. Matter of fact, there is apparently, this is a little confusing, so this will be a continuing theme in this discussion, as I've already indicated. There is some uncertainty here. What we'll say is what we think is likely, and I think very likely, but there are some things we could say today that'll turn out that, to the shock of everyone that's reporting on this, it's not quite that. So subject to that risk, we'll tell you what we think are in fact the things that are correct, and to the extent we do another show, as I think we will in give it a good 6 months.
Yeah, there's got to be something more coming out of this.
Then we can correct anything that was reported incorrectly. So, but we do try to go to sources that we trust, and whenever you're doing research like that online, you have to be careful what journalists you use, and even they can be wrong. So, subject to that, here's what we think. We think that there was a trust that was drafted, an agreement of some sort, and could have been a mutual contract, which you can have regarding estate planning that can be enforceable. In other words, a married couple can enter into an agreement regarding the creation of estate planning documents in which there's this exchange of promises that after the first dies, the surviving spouse will not change the estate planning. And that can be enforceable, but there has to be mutuality, some exchange of consideration. These are things that are required for a contract. But it shouldn't surprise you that the law generally will accommodate whatever deals, subject to their being illicit in some way, whatever deals people want to make regarding their lives. And this too is in that that province. So people can get together and decide that, look, I want to have an estate plan in my life that I want my wife or husband to live by. And I have to worry that, particularly if it's a second wife or husband, that maybe if I go first, they'll go off and do their own deal, that we'll only have these mutual estate planning documents in which we each give to the other our assets, and we do these things, and where there's lots of reciprocity or mutuality in the deal. You wouldn't want to enter into such a deal unless there's some way to be sure that you want to hold the survivor to the deal. And yes, you can, and there are such contracts. I don't know that took place here. I'm pretty confident that if there were a prenuptial agreement, we'd know about it.
Well, I thought it was interesting. One thing that I read that, that if he were to have died first, that her will stated that something about 90 days, if they pass 90 days of each other.
Let's come to that.
Okay, because that's very interesting to me. I've never heard of that before.
No, that's an interesting point, and that ties in with this ability to fashion. The law will pretty much let you fashion your own estate planning documents to a point, as long as it's not against public policy and things like that. And many of the things that come into play are simply default provisions. So in this case, it may be, and I've read that reported in two ways. I've seen it 90 days, but I've seen it more often at 30 days. Okay. So if they die within 30 days is what I saw quoted in an estate and trust reporter. Okay. So that means that what she's saying is that as to her estate, if they die in a way that is indistinguishable as to who died first, then she wants a 30-day period applied, and that if it fails to meet the 30-day period test, then it goes to charities of her choice. And she had named what ends up being the personal representative that will serve the estate planning of Gene Hackman too, one by the name of Peters, a lawyer, and that person was to essentially act as a trustee or to be charged with creating a trust and appointing a trustee, the job of which is to take her portion of the assets and use them for charitable purposes. What raised questions in my mind about both of their provisions apparently have some sort of default or contingency beneficiary relating to these charitable purposes is usually when people do that, they have specific charities in mind. They, you list, I really care about the Cancer Institute. Or if you're a Christian in a particular denomination, you don't say good Christian causes. You name particular organizations that you care about. So generally when you have charitable inclinations, you have something specific in mind. Your idea is not just to give to the world. You do that when you've exhausted your list of things you care about, of people you care about in the world. And then so you have this catch-all phrase, well, give to good and benevolent things. So you wouldn't see that person. That doesn't sound like a very charitably motivated person. It's just kind of like, oh, well, I don't know anything else to give it to, so give it here. And here's the clue on that is the way that language is worded is language to the effect that it says to charitable causes that we have expressed support or indicated support for benefit humanity. I can be a little more specific here. Language that has been reported, and I think this is reliable, to achieve purposes beneficial to the community consistent with the charitable preferences and interests expressed or indicated by my spouse and me during our lives. So this was apparently in her will. So what troubles me about this is that there are 3 children. Granted, not her kids, but if this language were mirrored in Gene Hackman's will, that would be really troubling because it would indicate that this is not a driving sense of duty or devotion that you see in a lot of charitable gifts. And, people who give their churches, for example, sometimes it's not unusual in some cases where the kids are self-sufficient. I mean, they really care about that church or they really care about this organization they've given their lives to, that sort of thing. But when you see language like this, it's like, oh, who else is there? And and for her, I know they're not her kids, but there is somebody else.
Yes.
And unless you don't care for them at all.
Well, I mean, their age. I mean, there's quite an age difference between the two of them.
Well, granted,
and usually women outlive men. So does that have anything to do with it? Do you think she just assumed that she was going to get all of his stuff and then she could change it later?
You and I are confident, and I don't have this information. Do you know how many grandkids there are?
No, I do not know the grandkids. I just know the 3 kids.
Aaron, can you look and see how many grandkids there were? I'm just curious. Anyway, at least, even if she didn't care for these kids, at least give to, her husband, in her husband's memory. If she wants, you hear people giving things to causes their husbands cared about. Well, there's probably no better cause if he was a decent guy at all, and I think he was, then he had some care about his grandkids. Maybe more care than just humanity in general. And that's really the issue. Does she give to humanity in general or particular members of humanity that she knows her husband probably did? I'll flatter Gene to say he did care about his kids and he cared about his grandkids. Assuming we're about to get an answer here in a minute, but
he has at least one confirmed grandchild, but it's not publicly disclosed.
Oh my gosh, just 1 out of 3.
They seem
kids?
very private. The kids do. There's not a lot of gossip.
So you're
about
thinking
them.
there are more grandkids?
Maybe.
Okay, there's
one
probably
confirmed.
more.
That's just...
Anyway, okay, viewers, don't hold us to this. There could be a number of grandkids, but my point would stand either way. There's at least one. Yeah. So, and then Gene Hackman. We don't know, incidentally, that Gene Hackman's will contained a provision that's essentially a replica of this. As a matter of fact, I've not heard that reported widely, if at all. But it does seem that both wills may have said to each other, and in the absence of that, to charity. So this raises a question about the planning that was in place anyway regarding Betsy. But we do know that they entered into some sort of agreement. We'll assume it's not a contract, as I just suggested could exist, but we'll just assume that they did a living trust. There was a trust that apparently predated the will. We think the trust was prepared in probably late 90s. I've seen around 97, 98 indicated. And you can have a trust without a will. It's generally not a good idea to not have a pour-over will with a trust, but I think this trust was apparently a living trust, a revocable trust. And if that were the case, then that would become kind of what I think was ultimately intended to be the repository, the destination of the assets that were in each other's estate. But remember, with a trust, you can choose to put in it any assets you want, and you definitely should be sure in what's called fund your trust. So again, there's too much speculation at this stage for us to know, but I'll bet that since they created this trust in the late 90s, that they probably put a number of assets in it. And that itself is going to indicate who the beneficiaries are. And it would be each of the 2 spouses, if it was a joint trust, and what I've read is that it was, that this trust would have as beneficiaries each other. So when they're both alive, they're both beneficiaries. When one dies, it's the survivor. And then thereafter, there would be beneficiaries. And that beneficiary could be simply charities in general. It could be language like I just read that we know was in the will of Betsy. Mm-hmm. I'm not confident at all that the kids were named in this trust, which is really surprising to me, particularly if it were being prepared in the late 90s when the kids were younger and there was—
they were much younger.
Yeah, much confidence about, were they in fact going to be self-sufficient, et cetera. So it troubles me that there would have been this estate planning and children not named, even though they were probably adults at that age, they would have been. So
they'd have been in their 40s.
Yeah, you
30s,
wonder.
40s.
So that troubles me. And I think, well, what assets went into that trust? But you should know that whatever assets went into that trust, those are governed by that trust. They're not governed by whatever's in the wills later. I mean, once they're in the trust, then the instructions governing that trust, whatever the trustee of that trust is told to do, is the way, and for whom they're told to do them, which would be the definition as beneficiaries, they will be entirely the attention and the direction that all these assets would flow in the future. So,
And we're not going to know about that because it's a trust.
yeah, but we don't. Yeah, that's
We want to know.
we want to know, but all indications are the kids are not named. And so let's move forward a little bit to the early 90s. We think it was in 2000. I read it was definitely 2005 when the wills were prepared. So these were apparently wills of each of them. And we know that their estate at the time of Gene's death, we think that his estate, I say his, their estate was around $80 million. I'm pretty confident that's a pretty good number. There's definitely intellectual property value there, his name, his likeness. A lot of fans of Gene Hackman. He had a real screen persona, was one of the top earners, et cetera, et cetera. So the assets that went into this joint trust that was created in the late 90s could have included all of those assets, quite frankly. But if not, then they'd be governed by these wills that were prepared in '05. And often the plan is when you create wills like that is, I used the phrase a while ago, pour over, is simply to pick up any assets that you had outside the trust. And sometimes people will choose to keep some assets outside the trust, not at all uncommon. And their intention is to be sure, though, that when they pass away, that they end up being dumped into the trust. And that means that the trust becomes really the center of attention and the source of accomplishing all their goals. That's where they put their thought into how are the assets managed, are there any rules about how the funds are released to beneficiaries, et cetera. And often, though, when you're talking about spouses, those rules can be, and typically are, very liberal, meaning the survivor may have a separate trustee because you want asset protection. You also want the privacy. There may be some tax benefits to the spouse not having direct, complete control.
Well, I would imagine, too, it also helps families. So that way you can't blame just one person on everything.
Oh, Instead, it can be huge for that purpose.
Yeah.
Because
you don't want that drama.
Yeah, so no. When you have multiple beneficiaries, it can be a referee.
Yeah.
So, but in this case, it looks like these two people were very devoted to each other. They go off and live their lives for themselves in many ways, and they wanted to be away from the world. And as a physical symbol of that was where they were found and how they were living at the time. And yet they were both known as being kind and good people.
Yes.
So, complicated picture. So this estate planning that was done, it could have been intended to just capture assets that in case they didn't have them, but they really had already done all their legwork to put all these assets in the trust already. But my guess is that they didn't do that, because I think that when they waited to follow up and do new wills in '05, I think they had assets in mind that were not already in the trust, significant assets that were not in the trust. And that's not always a mistake, but it is telling, incidentally, about what may very well have been the terms of that trust as far as beneficiaries. And I saw one report where it said that the kids were named as contingent beneficiaries. Well, that's good. That means, and this was only by Gene Hackman, not by Betsy. Mm-hmm. Betsy, I'm reasonably confident about the terms I gave you a while ago. Gene's will I'm not as confident about. I find it incredible that a man who, by all indications, had no bad will toward his kids would have not named them. Just, if nothing else, once he's exhausted every other purpose he could think of.
I mean, it's your legacy.
Yeah.
You want to leave something behind.
Yeah,
right?
and you want to allow for the possibility that you're going to have additional grandkids. With certainly in '05, he had no reason to expect that he might not have a lot of grandkids or some grandkids. And so if his will says what we think it says or what is reported, then it means they left out his kids entirely. That instead he has a provision where it goes similar to Betsy's. It goes everything to Betsy, and then if Betsy predeceases, then it goes to these charitable purposes. But another source that I read regarding the will, and I can imagine this too, though I wonder on one hand, could a lawyer that he would hire fail to have a contingent beneficiary? Is that possible? And I tend to think no lawyer would make that mistake. So I'm tending to think that the reports that I've read, which are the predominant reports, are that what he's listed is everything to his wife, period. No contingent beneficiaries, no provision even for charitable causes. Now, that's not catastrophic. Remember, anything that's already in his trust, and I think it was a joint trust, but either way, anything that's already in his trust is governed by the terms of that trust. So even if it were true that when he dies, he had simply put, when I die, I want everything to go to my wife, and then signs his name. That would only affect the assets that are in existence at that time. But it would open up a litigation regarding what happens next because, you always want to have contingent beneficiaries. These are the people you put down when you're trying to think, okay, this is what I really care about. This is what I really want to happen. But I realize that brother that I'm really devoted to, that I care much more about, that's been so much a part of my life, I want it to go to them. But if he doesn't, I have this brother that moved to California when I was 18.
Well, it's like you're ranking your friends,
You're
right?
ranking.
I mean, you're saying, I like you, but I like you better.
Well, and you're doing two things. Yes, you're ranking, for sure. But sometimes it's based on a need. So the rank is not so much your fondness, but the rank is on need.
Yeah. So if you have a multimillionaire brother, you're thinking, you're not going to need my $50,000.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that goes on too. So I'm really interested to find this out, but I still think this doesn't impair the benefit nor the entertainment value of this topic at this stage. So hence we've charged forward here today. But it does set the stage for another show.
Well, and I did read somewhere there the estate will actually be prohibiting any of the photos that were taken of both of them when they passed, what the police found.
Oh, God, I don't even want to see those photos.
Who then is the estate?
That's the personal representatives who these are the people that are appointed in the wills to go to the probate court in that county, Santa Fe County, and open the estate, meaning file a document with the court that says this person has died. We want the courts to administer this matter and help us decide, who gets. The purpose of opening the estate is mainly twofold: to identify creditors and get them paid.
Okay.
And to take whatever's left and give the stuff to whoever's supposed to get it. That's kind of the two primary roles. But preliminary to that is, the court has to make a determination, are these documents genuine and real and valid? So often it never gets past that, meaning somebody will file a document, open an estate, and then all of a sudden somebody files another document and challenges the validity of the will. They may say it's a forgery. They may say undue influence. So that's kind of a fight that occurs at the doorway to this room in which these things get decided before you even get to talking about who's supposed to get what in the will, who are the creditors out there, are their claims valid, and before you get into that's kind of the substance of much of the probate process. Before you even get there at the doorway, you have to decide, is this piece of paper that says it's a will, is it valid? And sometimes the fight occurs right at the door. And so if they prove that there was undue influence or whatnot, then all those contents, gone. They could say that the undue influence affected a particular person or a particular provision, but often it invalidates the whole thing. And if it relates to testamentary capacity, which means, in his case, testamentary capacity means, do you have the cognition that's required to fully appreciate what you're doing? And remember, for estate planning, standard is low, low, low. The only way it can get lower is whether or not you have capacity to marry, oddly enough. That's true.
Wow.
We've talked about that on the show a couple times. But so in this case, 2005, I don't think there's a testamentary issue. No. But the probate that you mentioned, that was open. It's open by whoever has this document and names them as a personal representative. It could be just whoever had the will. They would really, if they came across this document, they have a duty to come forward and they would file it with the court, and then whoever is named in that document, the court presumes the document's valid if it has all the indicia of validity, signed, notarized, et cetera, signatures. And then the court, based on this presumption of validity, will go ahead and appoint a personal representative, and often the person in that document. And then they can argue if it's invalid.
Yeah.
So in this case, I'd be shocked if there's any time consumed with that. I think in this case, though, that it, there will be questions maybe about competency later on if it turns out that the kids are left out entirely. But let me bring up one other point, though. It's one thing if the kids are left out and there is a contingent beneficiary named in either the will or the trust. Remember, we're talking about two things here. And if we simply have in the will that whatever's in here goes into my trust, then the terms of the will, it's simply a matter of, is the will valid? Okay. And in 2005, I doubt that Gene Hackman was incompetent.
No.
And so and there's no evidence of any update on the will after that. So let's assume it's valid. If it's a standard pour-over will, though I've not seen this reported as the case, but if it's a standard pour-over will, you have a trust in place, then you don't need to say, I give it to I give this person these assets, et cetera, all the things you'd normally say. You've already said it in your trust. So you simply say in this pour-over will, which is what it does, it dumps it into the trust. It says, take whatever is in my estate, dump it in my trust. That's it. So the trust is the entire beneficiary, everything. So this is interesting, and we probably will want to update this in 6 months or so, depending on what develops. And if nothing interesting develops, then we wouldn't be updating it. Yeah. But another point I want to make is that because this is gone for, I know it's going to go for a substantial period of time, I think we need to break it up. And so we're going to break this into 2 parts, possibly 3. So I'm encouraging you to come back for the second part, in which we'll talk more about what I think is the meat of this show, and that's to talk more about the estate planning issues, the things that went wrong, the things that went right, and that's what we think is the most important aspect of the show. But we think that wouldn't be as useful if we didn't spend some time introducing you to this famous person from a perspective that you may not have thought of them as much before. So that's kind of what we've done in this part of the show. So I encourage you to come back and watch part 2. This has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell & Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.